Can someone explain these .NET versions?
Hi, welcome to the Hello World Show. I'm Spencer Schneidenbach.
I'm Heather Dowdy.
And we're here at NDC Oslo with the great Kathleen Dollard. She's the Director of Engineering at ROI Labs.
ROI Code. And
ROI Code. Microsoft MVP since '98. And an all-around great person. Happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So how did you get into code?
So I am actually very lucky in that for people that are my age, I won't say what that is, but most of them didn't have access to computers when they were young. This was kind of before, common computer in the home kind of thing. But I was lucky enough that my junior high had a cast-off computer from NASA, because I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, around the space program. Just so exciting right now, because everybody's excited about that Saturn, 5 Lego set, and so everybody's excited about the Saturn V again. But that was the world I grew up in, and so there was a cast-off computer from NASA, and I wrote stupid little programs that said things like, if the number is even, then print the word blue, and if the number's odd, then print red. And so I just did little tiny basic programs in junior high because I was so much trouble in the classroom that I made me go away and sit someplace else. So I had a great time, and I learned to program, and then I wound up, my career has pretty much spanned the lifetime of the IBM PC. I did some things before that because I was trained as a crystallographer, which requires quite a bit of computer and Fourier transforms and complicated things like that. But moved into broader programming, pretty much parallel with the PC revolution, which I know sounds really old right now. It seems like ancient history, but it's been great. It's been an absolutely fantastic time to be part of the industry.
So then how do you keep yourself passionate and invested after so long? Like, I've never met anybody who is as bright as you when it comes to the way that you share information. So
thank you.
Tell me how you do that.
Thank you. Well, I absolutely love people. I absolutely love teaching. My family is full of teachers. Accidentally, none of us really set out to do it. My mother was a teacher, but my brother's a professor of math education. I have a sister who teaches art in Arkansas, and my other sister has taught in university. So it's just something that, to me, it's what drives me. It makes me very happy when I help people to understand a concept, particularly a difficult concept that I think will affect what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm an extrovert and just love talking to people. I love being here talking to you all today, and it's just great fun for me to be able to do all that. So I'm lucky. I get to do this.
Well, and we are lucky to have you, so thank you for stopping by.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Kathleen, what are you going to teach us today?
I'm going to teach you about Dotnet Standard, what it is, and why you care about something that's upcoming from Microsoft.
Thank God, because this is such a confusing topic.
I know, I agree.
I can't imagine why. I think I'm going to also share with you some about why it's been very confusing and what's a little bit of history. So let me start there. So let's go way back in time. Let's go all the way back to the very beginning of .NET for a minute. And before that, we had VB, and we had C++, and this was not good enough for the future. So the future was like this great big question mark. We didn't know what was going to happen. What wound up happening is a great big explosion. Whee! So .NET came along and really made all of this just not where we were at anymore. So it just kind of killed it. And that was a really, really tough thing for the community, for everybody in it. It just kind of goes away. Let's get it all erased here. So it still exists. I know some people still do VB6 and they do C++, but in terms of what the focus was, that just, vamooshed. So we're 15 years later, and we need a new direction. So just like C++ and VB were getting really archaic and they were really creaky, the .NET got really creaky, and we don't like to recognize that. But the C# compiler 4 years ago was written in C++ before C# was created. So the compiler was, chicken and the egg with the actual creation of C#. That's still the compiler we were using. If you thought about it, you wouldn't sleep at night. So they redid that, and that was Roslyn, and that's done, and that was all taken care of. So now the next problem is the Dotnet Framework and ASP.NET. So ASP.NET is still running, like it's really intricately tied to IIS. It's huge, it's monstrous, it's big, and the competition is Node, and Node is little. And there's a lot of reasons that I've worked in Node, I can work in Node, there's a lot of reasons I prefer .NET. But the point is that all of that is now getting very creaky. Well, nobody wants what happened in 2000, 2002, when our whole world blew up around us. We don't want that. We're happy. Let's not do that. And .NET probably wouldn't survive it, because Node probably would take over and other things would come over, and Java might get a shot in the arm from that. And so, right now, .NET needs to change to go forward, but without breaking where we're at right now. So if you look at the story, you said you were confused, and I'll show you why you were confused. So have you ever sailed?
Never. No.
Okay, so when you sail, if the wind is coming from this direction and you want to go right there, that's where the treasure is, that's where you want to go. The way you're going to go upwind is to tap. So you're going to go like this, and like this, and like this, and you keep going at 90 degrees to the wind until you get to the top. And there's two ways I think of the chaos in the last few years, and this is one of them. So if I was to say things like DNX, you'd say, oh yeah, but they killed that. Or I would say JSON project files, oh, but they killed that. Or I would say little tiny itty bitty framework, and you're going, oh, I heard they made it bigger. And so all of these directions that they went, then we're like, oops. Now, why was this? It wasn't because they were idiots. It was because they had a set of ideas they were working towards. And then as their recognition of what we needed and our recognition of the community changed, they said, oh, let's change that. Let's not go that way. Let's turn and go back this way. And let's turn and go back that way. And so there's two reasons that this has felt so chaotic. And the last 2 years have been just unbelievably chaotic if you've been watching Microsoft and what they're doing with .NET. And this is one of them, that they've actually listened and paid attention and looked at what needed to happen. And because of that, they have actually shifted directions. The other thing that is important to understand is if you back all the way back to 1997, 1998, when Anders Hallesberg first went to Microsoft, it was a complete veil of secrecy. We didn't know anything about C# and .NET until Alpha 1 came out, and it was pretty baked, and then we had the beta, and they took little bits of feedback. But the big things were set. It was all done behind a curtain. Well, we're open source now. We're open source there's no curtain. Everything is transparent. So all of this kind of stuff that would happen in the past would be behind a veil and no one would see it. Now, honestly, because we could see it, the changes have been bigger. They have been really big changes. But they've been changes also because we saw them. We saw all this change, and now we're going, .NET Standard, it must just be the next shiny thing. And I actually think .NET Standard is a lot more than the next shiny thing. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about right now, is what is .NET Standard, and how did we get here, and why is it actually not just the next shiny thing, but it's sort of the treasure right here where we're at. This is the treasure that we've been going for, in my opinion, and I want to show you why. So I'm going to erase this again. Erase, erase, erase. Okay. So if you look at all of the libraries, and there's a lot of them, they intersect. So let's say that this is .NET Full Framework. So I'm going to say .NET, and I'm not good at this, .NET 4.6. We'll call it 4.6. And then we have another circle out here. It should actually probably not be quite so big. And this one let's call Xamarin. They're not very good circles, but Xamarin. And let's have another circle, and we'll call this UWP. Okay, and we can make .NET Core out here. Let's go ahead and make a .NET Core. Now, what's not great about this drawing is that there's actually a little more overlap than I've drawn. But what .NET Standard is actually a document. It's like an HTML specification. It's a document that says, all you guys, you should all do this set of things. And it's pretty big. It's most of .NET 4.6. It's this big thing in the middle. Oh, they're at the top. It's this big thing in the middle. It's the stuff that's common. So if you write your application and you target .NET Standard 2.0, and let me write that down, .NET Standard 2.0, because of course it's confusing. We have .NET Standard, we have .NET Core, we have .NET Full Framework, and we used to use other names around these things in the past, and it's all just very, very confusing. But if you write your application to .NET Standard 2.0 and you're using that subset of things, then you're going to be able to target .NET 4.6. Cool, we were doing that before. That's what we're doing today. And Xamarin, and UWP, and .NET Core. So you can't do your whole UWP app that way because, well, it's UWP. But if you have part of your app, one DLL, that holds the stuff for UWP or Xamarin or ASP.NET or whatever you're targeting, and then you have the rest of your assemblies, your domain, your repository, your service layers, all of that sits in this .NET Standard 2.0. Now you'll be able to move that code among different platforms. You can run on Linux.
Really?
Yeah, you target .NET Standard, you run on Linux. Now there's a couple of quick things to talk about on that because you're going, magic, magic, and it's not. It's something called a redirect. And redirects were introduced because version 1's always easy. Even version 1.1 is hard. So you go back, .NET version 1.1, 2003, way back in time, they already wanted to move some things. So if the old version said it's over here, and the new version actually has it over here, and there needs to be a way to do that. So your code can call into an assembly that does a redirect, and we'll just make a little box down here and make that a redirect. And it does a redirect over to the real code. And so this is you, and this is the real code. And there's a redirect that goes in between. So this is done, what's implemented on most of the platforms is through a bunch of redirects that get you to the right spot. And so you write to .NET Standard, and if you write to system.object, you might actually be talking to MS Core Lib system.object, or I think it's Microsoft. I can't remember what it is in Core, but your actual full namespace is going to be different, but it redirects for you. So you call the .NET Standard one, and then it goes to the right real one. So this is the magic that sits behind it, and there's some complexity to that. You don't care. The only thing you care about is if you target .NET Standard 2.0, then you're going to have pretty good coverage, and it's big. So what I would really, really encourage you to do is to go, and I have a little bit of room right here, but search for .NET Portability Analyzer. And if you do a search for that, you're going to find in the Visual Studio Store, I think it is, but you're going to find a download you can do that you can run against either from the command line or you can run it from Visual Studio, and it will give you a list of everything that you have that's compatible with all sorts of different versions of .NET, Xamarin. It's a very extensive thing. What you care about is whether or not you can target .NET Standard 2.0. And I'll bet that your application will right now run on .NET Standard 2.0 with no changes. I say that because even in NuGet, which is way more complicated projects, and people do crazy stuff in NuGet. So even in the NuGet repositories, 70% of those applications will run Portability Analyzer, come up, no problems, you can go straight over. So it's very cheap to do this. Once you do it, now you have the full power of being able to run wherever you want to run. And so it's a fantastic step forward. This kind of is the arrival point of .NET Core being ready to go, ASP.NET Core being ready to go. This is the arrival point we get to. It's all about targeting .NET Standard 2.0.
That's awesome.
So I did a fair amount. I have a small tiny library that I maintain, and then somebody requested that I move it to .NET Standard. And I remember that I did, and I remember this now. But I remember I had to kind of shuffle between the two because I wanted to make it as minimal as possible. Like there's a .NET Standard 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and it's essentially just an interface, but the interface is not implemented in all of these different platforms. So I remember specifically I had trouble with the reflection APIs. I had to use get type info as opposed to just get type.
So that comes from the fact that the UWP uses a different approach to reflection, but you were probably targeting the lowest possible version for the broadest reach possible because you're a library provider, and library providers do have a little bit different role. I'm thinking more in terms of business programmers in this picture. In that picture, you wanted to go as low you didn't want standard 2.0, you wanted standard 1.1, 1.3, as low as you could go, because then more people could use your library.
Okay, so
that's a
library
temporary situation to broaden your reach. You wanted to do that. My guess is if you went to 2.0, the reflection you were using probably would have worked. Can't guarantee it because I don't know exactly which APIs they were, but this is a pretty full breadth thing. Just to give you an idea of how much you were up against at that point, Dotnet Standard 1.6 targets something on the order of 13,000 APIs. That's individual properties, methods, classes, etc. Dotnet Standard 2.0 does 30 some odd thousand.
Oh wow.
Okay, so I think it's 34,000, something like that. So it's not a small jump. This was a jump from the old idea, remember that sailboat's tacking up into the wind. They thought they wanted a small, minimal set. And then they said, you can't get your job done. You had to change your code. And that wasn't good enough because people don't want to change their code, especially business code. So, Dotnet Standard is much broader. It's a much higher probability that there's no change needed. Now, if you think in terms of that, you might say, oh, now it's big and bloated. It's huge now. And the initial, like if you were to take it all and put it on a machine, it would be pretty big. But there's another process about trimming that's coming in. And trimming will allow us to, when it actually goes out to the final machine, you put it actually on your server. It's not going to carry a bunch of stuff you don't need.
Okay.
So we're both directions. We're going to get the best of both worlds here together.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for showing us.
Well, thanks for letting me show it. This is just so much fun. I just love explaining this to folks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's confusing. It's been confusing. So.
It's a little less confusing now.
Absolutely.
All right.
We made it crystal.
Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Don't forget to share this video on social media.
And comment below to be entered into our weekly giveaway.
Tell us what questions you have for our guests. See you next time.